It's another Thursday night with Real Monsters. I'm your host, S.K. Barrett, and joining me is the ever lovely and talented Wes Hobrick.
Hello, hello.
And we have two special guests tonight, Willis Morgan and Lisa Craven. Say hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
And,
Hello.
and we are going to talk about a very iconic case, if I can use that word, um, Adam Walsh. And one of the things I want to touch on more at the end, but I bring it up now because I don't want to forget, and that the I don't know fallout, the consequences, the unintended consequences of this case have been far-reaching and continue to do so. And I'd like to talk about those a little bit at the end. But let's start with Willis Morgan. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why are we talking to you about Adam Walsh?
Okay, the reason I'm here is to talk about the Adam Walsh case because I'm not only the author of Frustrated Witness, I am also one of the witnesses that were actually at the Hollywood Mall on the day that Adam Walsh was abducted. And that's the reason I'm here. I wrote a book about my experience.
So you
I
were
am
there.
putting Willis's websites in as we're talking here, so people can get them in the chat if they like.
Yeah, we got
Right.
a screen grab of that too. Let me pull that
I
up.
have two websites. One of them is about the book. That's frustratedwitness.com. And I have another website called justiceforadam.com. And on that site, it's about the case files. You can look at all the case files. I have numerous case files there.
There is a lot of stuff on there. I was going through some of that today. Is that roughly all 7,000 that came out of it, Willis, or?
Yes, of the Hollywood Police Department's case files. But I also have the FBI case files there as well. I have Milwaukee Police Department files. I have the Fort Lauderdale State Attorney's Office case files and many other files there too as well. Even my own files from a lawsuit that I filed against the Hollywood Police Department. So I have a separate file for there, as well as files of photos from the site where I believe Adam was murdered, as well as where the severed head was found. So, and Lisa can talk about that one later, where the severed head was found.
We actually got some photos from the site too that we'll be interspersing all throughout this. But Willis, I was curious. I thought it might be a good way to start off too. What was your day like on July 27, 1981?
Okay,
What brought you to the mall?
Right, back in 1981, I was working for a newspaper, the largest newspaper in Florida, the Miami Herald. And back then, we were working a 4-day work week, 10-hour shifts, 40 hours a week. And my off days were Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Monday being my middle day off, I decided to go have lunch at the Hollywood Mall. There was a deli in there, it was a German deli, and I wanted to have lunch there. So on my way there, I parked in the east parking lot. I went in, and I stopped in Walden's bookstore, and then I went down to the German deli. But before I went into the deli, I decided to go into Radio Shack just to look around a little bit. And it was in Radio Shack when I had this encounter with this young man, and the encounter was so bizarre that after he stomped out of the Radio Shack, I decided to keep an eye on him because I knew that somebody was going to be in trouble. Keep in mind, this was before Adam was even abducted. So I was watching this guy, and I actually saw him walk into the toy department. My thinking was he was going to go up to somebody else, and it was going to be a shoving match, words exchange, maybe a fight, something. Yeah. And so that's why I was watching him, because this was that tense and that bizarre.
So what was so odd about this interaction?
Was his appearance, just the way he approached me. Everything about him was just bizarre. That look in his eyes while he was trying to smile and be friendly at the same time, because he was trying to start a conversation with me.
Okay.
But I never responded to him because I didn't want to say anything of being thinking
Mhm.
that if I say something that would initiate conversation, and I didn't want to have a conversation with this guy. I wasn't there to talk to anybody. I was there to have lunch. So I didn't say anything at all to him, and he got more and more upset that I wouldn't respond to him. And then
I
he got
found your reaction to it very interesting too, because I
right.
can't imagine a lot of people would have had, frankly, the balls to follow somebody like that. You
Right.
know?
Well, that's how bizarre this was. That I just knew somebody was going to be in trouble. You know, it's not very often you get that gut instinct where you see somebody that's so crazy. I mean, I think one other time I've had that experience, and I was in my car just driving down the road, and I saw this guy talking to himself and shadow boxing on a street corner in Miami, and I said, "Wow, that guy's really, out of it." You
Right.
know. But this guy, I wasn't in my car. I was face to face with this guy. And so when he finally turned around and stomped out of the Radio Shack, I just knew that somebody's going to be in trouble. And, how do you get that gut feeling? And I didn't actually see anything happen. I didn't see the abduction. I saw him walk into the toy department, and my thinking back then was, well, that's the end of the Sears, and when he comes back out, he's going to come my way. I didn't want another encounter with this guy, so I turned around and left and went home. And it was that evening, that very same evening, when I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. I still remember that night. I had a local news station on TV, and I heard on the news the commentator, the anchor, saying something about an abduction and a missing child. And then he mentioned the Hollywood Police Department. I mean, the police department, the Hollywood Mall. And then he mentioned the time. And I'm thinking, that guy did it. I knew it was that guy. I just didn't know who the guy was. He never mentioned his name, and
Right.
so I had no idea who he was. But I did go to the Hollywood Police Department, and they did not want to hear anything I had to say. I actually walked out of there shaking my head, feeling like a jerk for even wasting my time going there, because all they wanted was a receipt to prove I was at the Hollywood Mall. And they kept asking me questions like, did I see a vehicle? Did I get the tag number of the vehicle? And I tried to explain to them this was inside the mall. I never went outside the mall, seen anything outside the mall. And so they just dismissed me and said, well, if we need you, we'll call you. And they never called me. So I kind
Now,
of
what was the physical description of that guy? And
well,
it, mhm.
like days later, a week later, composites started coming out from other witnesses that went to the Hollywood Police Department. And they were the spitting image of the guy that I had that encounter with. And, if not the exact spitting image, I just looked at these composites and I knew that I couldn't do any better. And that's the reason I never really went back to the Hollywood Police Department, because I figured, well, they got their composite, what else can I do? There's not much I can do. I didn't get the tag number. That's all they wanted was a tag number and a vehicle description. And I didn't get any of that, so what else do I have to offer? So I never really bothered going back. But
Very
I knew
interesting.
I knew that guy that they gave that composite, which you can look at in my book as well as my website, frustratedwitness.com, and as well as in the case files.
I'm putting it on the screen now.
Yeah. Remember, there's
Yeah,
multiple
get that.
composites, not only from the Hollywood Mall, but from other locations as well.
There's more people who saw, this guy that helped them draw that composite like that. And you said in another interview that I took a little bit of source material from that you pegged his age at about 20.
Excuse me now? But
The age of the man you said
exactly, yeah, right. This guy was about 20. And
Okay.
they finally closed the case and pitted on another guy that was in his mid-30s, And, there's a big difference between somebody in their 20s or 20, I said 20 or 21 in that age range,
Right.
and somebody in the mid-30s. And all the witnesses said it was somebody in the early 20s. And so...
Right. There is typically a substantial physical change between your early 20s and your 30s.
Right. Plus, not only that, the composites don't even match the guy they pinned this on. and he had nothing to do with it. And through my research, he wasn't even in South Florida ever. There's never any proof that he was down here except for one time when they dragged him down here. They actually flew him down here on a trip, so he could show them, where he dumped Adam's head.
Which, yeah, that suspect would have been about 15 years
suspect.
older than the
he
agitated
couldn't get anything
man.
right. He couldn't get Adam's description right or anything.
So how many people saw this guy? I mean, other witnesses created the composite, so how many witnesses were there?
Well, I always say there was a Yankee Stadium full of witnesses, but in reality, I'd say around a dozen or so.
Okay,
That's from the Hollywood Mall. Remember, there's 4 more from the Turnpike that Lisa was going to talk about, the Florida Turnpike, and we'll get to that later.
Yeah, but just this is significant because anytime you go to the mall, you know, if I go to the mall and if I walk around, hundreds of people see me, almost nobody's gonna, if anybody asked, it was shown a picture of me later, nobody would remember that.
Right, unless it was an incident. If you just
Exactly. There has to be a reason. This is my point. There has to be a reason to remember somebody.
Right.
Like you had.
Somebody coming up to you totally disheveled with this dead dull look in his eyes, and a smirk, a forced kind of a smile on his face, trying to talk to you, which was the encounter I had. And the funny thing is, other witnesses say the exact same thing. Before I even contacted them, they were saying the same thing. And like I said, not only from this location, but from other Sears toy departments, in malls, in Sears, and like July 13th, there was another incident in another mall where a mother, a case that mirrors the Adam Walsh case, Terry Keaton, and his mom, Ginger Keaton, went to the Twin City Mall. Okay, they went to Sears. She went shopping for a dress while he stayed back in Sears in the toy department when a disheveled man tried to approach him. He ran and got away because he was 10 years old. Adam was only 6. He didn't stand a chance. But Terry was 10 years old, and he ran to the clothing department where there was a woman and her son, and he grabbed onto them and begged them for help. And this disheveled guy just turned around and took off.
Now, this is also where the blue van comes in.
There was a blue van at that site as well, parked in the fire lane as well. The entire case mirrors the Adam Walsh case, where a mother goes to Sears, leaves her son in the toy department, goes shopping.
Which we'll get more into the blue van part of that, too.
Which, by the way, was not an unusual thing in that day, by the way, dropping your kids off in the toy department.
Oh, no, not at all.
Exactly, and that was so common.
And
like I said, there's 2 cases right there that mirror each other. So, yeah, I know some people lambast Reve for leaving a son there, but like you say, that was common back then.
Absolutely.
And Ginger Keaton, the same thing, As well, not only that, but the day before Adam was abducted, another mother left her son and her daughter in the toy department. And Dahmer came there the day before Adam was abducted and tried to abduct Joel, Mia Taylor's brother. Well, they were both in the toy department. But again, Joel got away because their mother and the security guard both showed up, and they ran to their mother, and the guy took off. And so they all say the same thing about who this person was. And then we'll get into that, too, who the real abductor of Adam Walsh was, and not the false narrative that the Hollywood Police Department used to close the case.
All right. So what was the scenario? So what do we know? What was the sequence of events at the mall that we know of?
Right. Okay. In my book, I have a drawing of the layout of the entire mall and the path from the Radio Shack where I had my encounter and where I followed this guy to the toy department. So I have the entire path there to the toy department that he took. And in the toy department, I have a timeline from the witnesses that were in the toy department. Okay, there's numerous witnesses, like I say, that kids, there were kids back then at that time in 1981. They're grown up now. Like I said, Mia Taylor and her brother Joel, they were there 2 days in a row. Sunday, July 26th, when this person, you want me to say who the person is? It's Jeffrey Dahmer, the person I had my encounter with, and the person that the composites match, and the person that all the witnesses say was the guy.
And you're 100% convinced that's the truth.
Oh, I'm one of the witnesses. I was there. I know who I encountered. I'm positive.
I'm just getting your level of certainty on that.
Devil's advocate. I gotta say, Willis, the more I researched for this show, the more you're selling me on this idea.
Right.
Just looking into it.
Right. And like I say, it's not just me. There are numerous witnesses. We all say the same thing.
That was
composites match. See, I didn't make a composite, but the witnesses that made the composite, they have composites to back up what they're saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then when I contact them, they said yes, that's the person they were trying to describe. Keep in mind what a composite is. Okay, you've seen the composites.
Right.
So a composite is a witness describing after the fact, sometimes a month, sometimes even years after the fact, to an artist that never seen the suspect who has to draw the composite.
Mm-hmm.
So considering all of that, and you look at these composites, how close they are to Jeffrey Dahmer, versus Artist Toole, the person they pinned it on, that you have to believe these witnesses, especially when they give their accounts, when you listen to them. And you can listen to them on my website, frustratedwitness.com, because I've done radio shows with other witnesses, Now, Lisa is that's coming on later. She's not actually a witness to anything, but the reason she's here today is because she's been working with me and interviewing some of the witnesses. And she's interviewed 3 of the witnesses, of the 4 witnesses from the Florida Turnpike. Richard King passed away, so, we're unable to talk to him. But she interviewed 3 witnesses that are still living that saw something at the turn site. Keep in mind, there's witnesses from all 3 sites relevant to the Adam Walsh case and a blue van at all 3 of those sites. Okay, that's the Florida Turnpike, where Adam's severed head was found, the Hollywood Mall, where Adam was abducted from, and the Sunshine Subs, where Jeffrey Dahmer was working. Okay. All witnesses say there was a blue van involved at all 3 of those locations.
Which it may be important at this juncture to let people know how we know that Dahmer was in Florida at that time.
Right.
Which it was 81 when he was, I guess, dishonorably discharged from
dishonorably discharged. He was discharged for alcoholism under honorable conditions, though.
Okay. Yeah, he was discharged at any rate, and they sent him a voucher for anywhere in the country, and he decided Florida. And I guess he spent most of
he'd been in
his
Germany,
time
right?
through that sleeping on the beaches. Yeah, he was in Germany when he was in the army.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He was in Baumholder, where there were also numerous murders committed around the base area.
I was curious about that as well, Willis. You had talked to some of his, I guess, roommates over there?
I have, yes.
And what did they tell you about him?
Well, they confirmed that, Jeffrey Dahmer came back a number of times with blood on him, after he spent a night out, and you find out, that at that time there were murders that were committed over there. One of them was on Thanksgiving of 1979, when Dahmer and a few other soldiers were invited to by a sergeant to his house for a Thanksgiving dinner, Carlos Cruz. And while they were at the house, after dinner, it started snowing like a blizzard, and the temperature dropped down below 0. And Dahmer didn't like the sleeping arrangements because Carlos told him that, to stay over for the night because of the weather and make their way back to the base in the morning. And so Dahmer walked out, around 10 o'clock at night. He just walked out of the house in sub-zero weather. And he came back 4 hours later with blood all over him, his broken glasses, and
nobody asked him
at the
about
dining
it?
table, they did, and he just said, "I think I did something, but I can't talk about it." That's exactly what Carlos Cruz said. He said, because Carlos Cruz called the Milwaukee Police Department after Dahmer was arrested, and he told them that. But when they interviewed Dahmer at first, Dahmer said that he never left the base, and he only one time when he went to Oktoberfest, and there was even then there was a murder on the train on the way back that Dahmer took, but Dahmer denied everything that. And when Carlos Cruz called the Milwaukee Police Department, we interviewed Dahmer about that, and Dahmer said he now remembers that he did go out for that Thanksgiving dinner, but he doesn't remember ever leaving. And there's a number of people there that were at that Thanksgiving dinner that said he did leave. He was out for 4 hours. When he came back, his jacket was warm. It wasn't cold to the touch like it would be if you were out in sub-zero weather for 4 hours.
Jeez.
And he had blood spatter on him, and he washed himself up real good and sat at the table in the kitchen. And he just kept staring straight ahead, and that's when Carlos asked him, what's wrong? And he just said, I think I did something bad, but I can't talk about it. This is Carlos' statement,
Now, Wes, when we did the Dahmer show a little while ago, I don't recall, and maybe I'm just not remembering, but did he have claims of lost time?
He did with, I think it was the third canonical murder that he was charged with, where he said that he dissociated before he bludgeoned the guy to death.
Okay.
It was at the, I can't remember the name of that hotel in Milwaukee, but it was there where that one happened.
Right.
Yeah, right. I don't believe anything Dahmer says, though. And anyway, he's been caught in so many lies, and the problem is they just don't want to, go. They want to go along with everything he says because they don't want the Milwaukee Police Department to look bad. To give you a quick example, there was a murder in the same building that Dahmer was living in, and they interviewed Dahmer because they interviewed everybody in all 49 apartments of the Oxford building where Dahmer was living. He was in apartment 208, and there was a murder in apartment 3 on the third floor. I think it was 318. And so they interviewed Dahmer about that one, or 308, I believe it was. But anyways, they interviewed Dahmer about it, and Dahmer claimed he didn't know the guy. And then I called people there, and I found a number of people that say, they saw Dahmer going into Dean Vaughn's apartment, the guy's name. He was found in his room, strangled, intoxicated, and drugged. And he was on his bed face down with his pants pulled down to his ankle and sodomized. That's the way they found him. And yet they never want to make the connection to Dahmer. Now, when somebody's sodomized, there has to be some DNA, and this is in just 4 months before he was captured. So this would have been still in 1991.
Right.
They had DNA. They could have connected that murder to Dahmer, but they never wanted to because Dahmer had this little boy in his apartment.
Wow.
A Laotian kid, and Dahmer drilled a hole in his head and injected watered down uric acid with a turkey basting needle into his brain.
Yep.
And he thought had this idea that he wanted to make zombies out of some of his people. So anyway, he thought his zombie experiment was working, and he left and went out to a bar to get drunk.
Right.
And he came back. The boy had escaped, and these two black girls, 17 and 18 years old, had found him in the street stumbling around naked. They called 911, and the police showed up. And first the fire department showed up. When the police showed up, they told the fire department to take off. And so that here comes Dahmer. Dahmer comes along, and the police tells the police that's his 19-year-old lover.
Right. Yeah.
And the police asked Dahmer. They said, "What's his name?" And Dahmer's like, "John. His name is John."
Yeah,
And the girls
and
say,
they let him go. They let him go back.
right. The
Yeah.
girls were screaming and protesting. He's not 19. Look at him. He's just a little boy, you know.
Right.
And they told the girls to take off, or they would take them downtown, which means, to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And they threatened the girls with jail if they didn't take off. And the girls kept protesting and They finally chased them off, and they gave the kid back to Dahmer. And Dahmer immediately murdered him and boiled his head and kept the skull.
Now, getting a bit back to his time in Florida there.
Right.
That was 81, like we said, he was discharged.
Right.
And it was that same year he goes down to Miami first.
Right. March 26th,
Mm-hmm.
1981.
And we're not totally sure about those first initial months that he spends there. But I guess it's June when he gets a job at a sub shop.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
What happened was when he was discharged, he took out his mustering out pay from the military, which I calculated from his DD-214 form and from roommates to be around $850 total between the money he got from discharge money, which is leave of absence, vacation, in other words, pay that was accrued, as well as money he had in his pocket. So around $1981. And he eventually ran out of money because he was renting in hotel rooms like once or twice a week, according to Dahmer. Okay, we don't have any proof of that, but he said he was renting a hotel just to take a shower once a week, and he drank up a lot of his money, and he ran out and he started dumpster diving. And he started dumpster diving behind this strip mall. And the guy that owned Sunshine Subs was taking the garbage out, and he saw him out there, and he asked him if he wanted a sandwich. And so he brought him a sandwich, and then a few days later he saw him out there again, and he asked him if he needed a job. And his name is Ken Halbert. He hired Jeffrey Dahmer as a busboy. And according to what he says, he's since passed away, so we can't really talk to him. But according to what he said, and what Jeffrey Dahmer said in his interviews with the FBI and the Milwaukee Police Department, as well as the Hollywood Police Department, because they sent a detective up to Milwaukee to interview him, he said that he was working so many hours when they asked him about the Adam Walsh case, he would have never had time to do anything because he was working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the guy that hired him, he said, no, that's not true at all. He was just a regular 8-hour shift. He was paying him minimum wage under the table, and he never worked weekends. And even the weekdays that he was working, he would constantly get sent home for coming in disheveled and drunk. And he couldn't remember if July 27th, Monday, was one of those days. But he did say that he would come in on Mondays so disheveled he would send him home, but he would come in the next day a little bit better and manage to get through the week. So that's why you see a lot of these attempted abductions, that are on Mondays, and that's why I do a chapter called Manic Mondays.
Mm-hmm. I found that very interesting.
Right, because he was constantly getting sent home, and so he would get the blue van and drive around. Now, other witnesses also say that the van was available to anybody to use. They had 3 trucks. There were 2 stores. One was a pizza shop. One was a sandwich shop. The pizza shop was about 10 blocks north of Sunshine Subs. It was called Mr. Pizza. The guy that owned the 2 stores, his name was Mike Pelletier. And he had 3 trucks for delivery. Back in those days, you didn't use your own vehicles, apparently. They used the 3 vehicles that were owned by Mike Pelletier. 2 of them were white pickup trucks, and those were the main trucks they would use for pizza delivery, except in the winter, they would use all 3, the blue van as well as the pickup. The blue van was used also for picking up the supplies for the 2 stores.
Mm-hmm.
But in the summertime, it was slow, so they just used the 2 white pickup trucks, and the blue van was available for anybody to use. And employees all say that they used it to go to Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, move furniture from one apartment to another. So everybody apparently had access to that, and everybody knew where the keys were, so they would just take it.
Okay, I want
Jeffrey
to I
Dahmer
want to
was doing
circle
that too.
back and let's do a quick timeline on the Adam Walsh case for people because that was a long time ago and people like myself probably don't know what transpired. So he was obviously he was kidnapped from the Hollywood Mall
Correct.
and so what's the timeline like? At least the public timeline.
Okay. Um, let me go back to the site the place where he was working at Sunshine Subs. After Ken Halbert hired Jeffrey Dahmer as a busboy, Ken said about 10 days after he hired him, Jeffrey Dahmer came in one day because it was his job now to take the garbage out at the end of the shift around 5 o'clock. So one day he took the garbage out and he comes back in and tells Ken. Ken says he said in a very monotone, matter of fact uh, voice, "Hey Ken, there's a dead man by your dumpster." So anyway, I went down and I got that police report because obviously, back in those days they weren't computerized, so you have to have
Right.
a date pretty close to a report that you wanted because they can't search, years back without knowing a specific date. So, but we had a date because Ken said it was about 10 days before, right? So that
Okay.
would have been, yeah, July 7th was the date, and he was hired in June. So about 10 days after that, it would have been July 7th. We found the report at the Dade County Records Department, and it even had the address of the sub shop there, and had Jeffrey Dahmer's name all over it, Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer, because Jeffrey Dahmer. What happened was after Jeffrey Dahmer told Ken about that dead body out there, the dead man, Ken went out to look, and sure enough, he saw a dead man there by the dumpster. And so he called the police. The police came, and they wanted to know who found the body. And he said, "My busboy." He said, "Well, get him out here. We need to talk to him." So that's how Jeffrey Dahmer got his name all over the police report.
And I guess
And
that guy turned out just to be a drifter or something, sleeping
right,
out there.
but
Yeah.
Jeffrey Dahmer knew all about this guy. He knew the guy's name, everything about him, because everything in the police report is what Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer said. Because Jeffrey Dahmer was only considered to be a witness at the time.
Right.
Right. So Jeffrey Dahmer, the report says Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer said the man went by the name of Bobby. Mr. Dahmer also said Bobby wasn't feeling well, and he was living in the meter room behind the sub shop.
Which we
So-
have some pictures of that too, SK,
Right.
if you
So
want
when
to.
I read
Right.
that, I knew right away because my thinking was, from watching enough CSI and other TV shows on the ID channel, I knew that most serial killers want to bring somebody back to a place they're familiar with. Especially if you abduct a little boy from a shopping mall. And like we talked about earlier, I was 100% positive it was Jeffrey Dahmer, but I had no idea where he could have brought Adam. But now I knew the meter room. So I made a beeline from the police records department straight to that meter room, and I managed to get inside under the assumption that anything I do is legal unless I get caught, of course.
Well, you
Now,
weren't
what
looking
year
for
was
you
that?
weren't looking you were not operating under, as government official. You were
Right.
just a citizen.
Well,
Now, what year was that, Willis, when you got in there?
oh wow, this would have been in 2007, I believe.
Oh, okay. So that
That
was the
was a
same
long time.
year I was reading a ABC News report where they sent in a
Oh,
PI to
that's
that
the reason
room.
they sent them there. What happened was,
Oh, okay.
I when I found that meter room, I told another freelance reporter about it, and I had a hard time. It took me 3 weeks to convince him that this was the site. He kept telling me I'm way off. I don't know what I'm talking about. This was just a meter, a food fight, over the dumpster,
Mm-hmm.
and so I took pictures and I showed it to him. Unbeknownst to me, he called ABC Primetime, and they flew from New York all the way down here. And Chris Cuomo was the one that narrated that show on Primetime before he started working for CNN. He was working for ABC.
But
And
yeah, I guess the expert they sent in, found that axe and that sledgehammer, and then some
I have
blood
that. Yes, right.
splatter.
Yeah, and I have all of that. And I even
Hmm.
shipped out my own blood spatter patterns and sent them to a number of crime labs to have, monoclonal nuclear DNA testing done, but we could never get any DNA from it because of the time frame, the humidity in
Right.
Florida, and the mortared
Hmm.
lime in the mortared wall, So we were unable to get anything from that.
And that's the thing with Dahmer's, that I would think, because only Walsh's head was found, that he would have had to, whoever killed him would have had to have had a space like that to do it in, right?
Right, right. And I believe because ABC Primetime hired one of the best CSI experts in Florida, if not the country.
Hmm.
And I say that because even when I was calling detectives in Germany, they said, they asked me if I've ever talked to Jan Johnson because she's one of the best in the United States. And so they even know of her in Germany, And she went in there and she did with a field kit. She tested the blood spatter patterns with luminol lighting that where they showed up the pattern and tested them with the field kit, and it came up as positive for blood, as blood. And she described the pattern as being indicative of a high velocity blood spatter pattern. Now here's the thing: that blood spatter didn't belong to that derelict Bobby because he had no blood on him.
Hmm.
So somebody was murdered in that meter room, yet the police refused to investigate. And that's why my first edition of Frustrated Witness, I have a picture on the cover. If you notice, it's that meter room. And it has the crime scene tape saying, "Crime scene, do not cross." But one of my attorneys told me every time she looks at it, she thinks it should say, "Crime scene, do not investigate." So on the second edition, I changed the crime scene tape to "Crime scene, do not investigate."
Oh,
Well, and
funny.
that's interesting because getting back to that original query about the official, I guess you could say, narrative, after Walsh was abducted,
Right.
they found only his head in that canal off the Florida Turnpike. And
Right.
then after a dragnet with local sex offenders, they ended up through an even longer process focusing on Otis Toole,
Right.
who we actually did an episode on Henry Lee Lucas and
Uh-huh.
Otis Toole.
And what was your conclusion on that?
Well, with when we did the episode on those two, you mean?
Yes.
That they're both liars and can't be trusted with much of anything.
Yeah.
Right. And you have very good insight.
Um,
They were considered to be the ultimate crime stoppers, or crime busters, because they were confessing to crimes all over the country.
Hundreds and hundreds of them
hundreds, literally.
that
So Adam
yeah.
Walsh
it's
was
not physically
only one of them.
possible for them to be at all the crime scenes.
Right, and that's why police departments across the country that closed cases based on his statements had to reopen them.
Yep.
And that's
And
all police departments except for one, of course. That's the Hollywood Police Department. But eventually, even the Hollywood Police Department completely dismissed Otis Toole as a suspect.
which
What
is
happened?
so weird with
Yeah.
we'll get to that. I was thinking of
Right.
08, but
Yeah, but let me just explain what happened was one of these detectives, okay, his name is Detective Joe Matthews. Okay, he was working for the Miami Beach Police Department as a homicide investigator. But he also had his own business called Southern Institute of Polygraph, and they hired his company to do the polygraphs of the Walshes as well as John Walsh's friend, James Campbell, who was their initial suspect. Okay, and they were so zealed in on this guy, and this is why they were dismissing all these other attempted abductions when even police chiefs were calling them saying, "Hey, everything in our city matches the incident in your case with the Adam Walsh case. The blue van, everything, and composites, descriptions, everything." And witnesses also from other locations were calling them, and they were dismissing everybody, even the police chiefs that were calling them, because they were so zealed in on James Campbell. So naturally, in 1991, when I worked for the Herald, there was this story in the paper that came out about this guy that did some horrible things up in Milwaukee, and there was this composite before I even read anything. I just saw that composite, and I just started screaming, literally. I said, hey, this is the guy. This is the guy I saw in the mall.
Wow.
I knew right away. Again, going back to you asking me about how certain I was, this is exactly 10 years later, almost to the week. That case was seared in my brain once I heard there was an abduction, and I knew it was that guy. But now I had a name to put to it, Jeffrey Dahmer. And so I worked for a newspaper. I went back to the Hollywood Police Department with that newspaper article, and I called the library up again back before they had things that were computerized. But that was the easy search because I knew the date, July 27th, 1981. I asked them, I said, do you remember the Adam Walsh case? And of course, everybody did down in South Florida, even across the country. Everybody knew about that case. And I said, can you send me the composite? And they did. And I took the composite along with that mugshot from the newspaper back to the Hollywood Police Department. Their jaws dropped when I showed it to them because it was a spitting image of each other. But they knew something I didn't realize. Miami Hill gave me the wrong composite. They gave me the one from the Twin City Mall. And they knew they had dismissed that.
Wow.
And then they went into full cover-up mode, and that's when all the evidence in the case files grew legs and walked off.
Now, SK, can we bring up I think we have a couple pictures, actually, of Otis Toole. I want people to see what he looked like versus that composite.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
hold on.
And I know we're doing a podcast here, so you can put that, post it, as well as a link to my website, and people can go to look at it for themselves. JusticeForAdam.com or FrustratedWitness.com.
Yep, I will post them again.
Right.
That was one of the questions I had for you was what went through your head when you saw Dahmer in 91?
I was freaking out. Believe me, I was drinking one cup of coffee after another all night long, staring at that composite in the paper.
Wow. And one thing that was interesting to me about this, it seemed to me that law enforcement's main objection when they look at it was that, but it doesn't fit Dahmer's MO. But the problem with that is a confusion over MO and signature. MO changes over time.
Right. Also, I always say this. Someone forgot to tell Jeffrey Dahmer that he had an MO to stick to.
This is true.
Well, and I mean, you don't have to look any farther than Bundy. I mean, his MO changed every region that he operated in.
Right. The book on MOs has been rewritten many times over, and now they need to rewrite it over again.
Yeah, exactly. And especially even if you forget about any possible serial killer activity in Germany with Dahmer, he still killed Stephen Wilkinson, I think was the last name, in 1978. So this would not have been his first murder.
Right. I believe the name was, Steve...
So Wilkins or Wilkinson?
Boy, Lisa, help me out.
I'm sorry, what? Yeah.
1978. The guy that Jeffrey Dahmer murdered in 1978.
Stephen Hicks.
Stephen Hicks. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. I had it on mute, so
anyway, this might be a good time to bring Lisa in on this. Let me explain real quick about the Turnpike Witnesses, then we can go to Lisa a little bit. These witnesses, that saw, two of them, let me talk about two of them.
Well, before you talk about witnesses, tell us what happened. What is the Turnpike? What is the significance? What happened there?
Right, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, on August 7th, 1981. That's around 10 days after Adam was abducted. Two fishermen found a severed head off the Florida Turnpike around mile marker 130. Okay. On August 7th, 3 days before it was found, there were witnesses passing that area. One of them his name was Dennis Bubb. He saw a blue van parked on the side of the turnpike, and there was this white male on this little footbridge with a white bucket and taking something round out of the bucket and throwing it into the water. Okay, when he called the Florida Police Department, the Hollywood Police Department, after Adam was abducted on July 27th, he told them that on August 7th, he saw this blue van on the side of the turnpike, and they told him, yeah, we already know about the blue van. It has nothing to do with the Adam Walsh case. So they completely dismissed him, as well as the other witnesses too. And I think now you can bring Lisa in, and she could talk about those witnesses because she has interviewed them.
Sure.
Hi. So, yeah, I did actually interview them as well as somebody else. So I think what you were getting at was the significance of the turnpike is that's where Adam's severed head was actually found. Was
Okay. And how
off
long
of-
after the abduction was this?
So it was found on August 10th, and he was abducted on the 27th. So that's like 2 weeks.
13 days, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Well,
so
the
when
head
they
was found on
that-
August 7th. August 10th, 11th, it was found on the 10th, and August 11th is when witnesses started calling the Hollywood Police Department.
Right. And so, I mean, obviously everybody had already heard about it because it was a big news thing. And this was in 1981, so the times are different with how things were approached with missing children like we do
Right.
now, obviously,
Yeah.
thanks to this family. Unfortunately, this family was kind of pioneers in that because of this.
Right.
And so, and I don't know if you guys really got through the whole abduction of Adam.
No.
But here's my piece in it, by the way. But I'll
Please.
just throw that in because people might be wondering, what is this girl? So I read Willis's book, and I was an investigative journalism student, and I contacted him because I'm from Milwaukee, so I was about 12 when Dahmer got arrested, and my father was a
Did we lose Lisa?
Wow, it sounds like it. Lisa?
Uh-oh.
Maybe you can recontact her?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's gone.
Yeah, I could fill in a little bit more of that detail.
Yeah,
One
this is why I always use the
interesting.
landline. Yeah. Okay, anyway, yeah, these witnesses were calling the Hollywood Police Department, and they were dismissing them, and the blue van. Another witness was, what happened was Dennis Bubb, who worked for a public supermarket chain, and they had the main warehouse up in Lakeland, Florida, in Central Florida, and they used to bring supplies down for the supermarket chains down here in South Florida, in the Miami, Broward area.
Hey,
So
sorry.
Got you back.
Lisa now.
Yay.
Yay.
Sorry, I don't even know what I was saying before I cut out.
Well, I was talking about the truck drivers that they used to do those runs between Lakeland and Miami to bring the trucks, the supplies down to Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about the Clifton and Dennis?
Yeah, Dennis Bubb and
Yeah.
Ramey.
Oh, I know what
Ramey.
you were saying. How you got started on this? You were a investigative journalist.
Student.
That's where you left off.
Yeah, I was a student and I read Willis's book,
Right.
and so then I contacted him because I had grown up knowing about both of these cases, and seeing them collide was like, what? And he's a witness, so obviously he has all this information. He has all the case files, but I just wanted to know, he also has all the contact information for all these people. So I've actually talked to 13 people involved in this, including Willis, and I've talked to Detective Matthews, and I'm writing a book on my own version of it, which isn't really much different than Willis's. It's just my rendition of it. And in doing that, I got to speak with those Turnpike witnesses, and So the two of them, the truck drivers, as well as another gentleman who was just on the road that day. And then the fourth one, did you talk about Richard King?
Yeah, he passed away though. So
Yeah. So there was a fourth person
him.
because when you look at the case files, that's where all this is, by the way. So Richard King was somebody who worked on the Turnpike, and he said he could describe the man, and he was willing to go under hypnosis, which back in 1981 was like the lie detector test, and he could describe the man, and he said it was an older van too. So basically there's four people that saw the same thing, which is also the same van description-wise that they saw at the mall.
Now, just out of curiosity, Lisa, did the police have any witnesses at all that said they saw Toole in his white Lincoln there?
Well, I
no.
talk about him. That there was one guy there and this guy was threatened with arrest because he failed the polygraph 3 times. His name is William Mitzler, and he failed a polygraph 3 times, and they tried to send him to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist even said he was unable to work with the guy. So they threatened him because he kept changing his story, and he was never there at the mall at the time that Adam was abducted. So they completely dismissed him, but it was the same detective that we talked about that revived that witness as a viable suspect, even though he had nothing to do with it.
Now, he was the same one who later befriended the Walshes, too, wasn't he? Or was that Hoffman?
No,
same one.
No.
Okay. That's another question. I don't think it's really fair to ask anybody about it once you get down to it, because you can't see inside John Walsh's head. But
Right.
it's just so weird that he clings to that as the only theory.
Well, are you familiar with the Stockholm Syndrome?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
a little bit.
Okay. Patty Hearst is one of the big cases where, she
Right.
was abducted and by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and she ended up robbing banks with them. And it took years of psychiatric treatment to get her to, realize that, she was a victim in an abduction. But anyways, John Walsh wrote his book Tears of Rage. The rage was over the way the Hollywood Police Department was handling the investigation of his son's case. But yet when they finally closed the case and pinned it on Otis Toole, all of a sudden, this police department, as well as one of the detectives that worked on the case from its inception, again, Joe Matthews, okay, all of a sudden now they're his best friends and colleagues. So John Walsh just wanted closure so bad that he clings to this false narrative.
Yeah.
Sad.
It's something of an ongoing puzzle to me that police departments all over the world, in fact, have this mentality of we need to put somebody in jail. And we don't give a shit who it is, as long as we get somebody in jail for this particular crime. And how little regard they give to getting the right person. They just want somebody that they can convict.
And this is why very often we hear somebody being released from prison after decades of being locked up because they were found innocent with DNA. And I listen
more and
to
more all
them.
the time.
Right here in South Florida, for instance, Frank Lee Smith, okay? He was on death row for 14 years, okay? He died on death row of pancreatic cancer before they executed him. And only after he died did they find out that he was innocent with DNA, and they captured the real guy that murdered this 8-year-old girl, okay? Strangled her, stabbed her multiple times, and raped her, okay? And his name was Mosey, okay? And in the meantime, while Frank Lee Smith was locked up on death row, he murdered 11 other women and kids, running loose because they pinned this on an innocent man. And there's case after case like this where they find people innocent after decades because they go and pin these murders on innocent people just to make themselves look good. And they, once you give a case to a DA, they become focused only on getting the conviction.
Right. That's their job, right?
That's their job. Get a conviction under any circumstances.
I think, and I think part of the problem is that the fundamental incentives for law enforcement are fucked up because
Right.
they're rewarded with promotions and raises and advancements
Right.
and all this kind of shit based on numbers,
Right. And once they
not
get focused,
accuracy.
right. And once they get focused on a suspect, they want that suspect to be found guilty so bad, even if there's exculpatory evidence,
Right.
proving that that's not the right suspect. Sometimes they'll go and they hide the evidence.
There's lots of cases of that.
They won't show it.
And
that's how these people end up in prison.
And that's not even getting into the false confessions angle either.
That's another thing with Toole there. He was borderline intellectual functioning. I mean, his IQ is only 75.
Right.
It doesn't say that it's a false in and of itself, but it lends to the idea that it could have been false.
And if you look at the case files, you could see, if you look at Willis's website, you could see literally every interview they had with him. Not only do they lead him into everything, they give him the answers.
Wow.
He's getting time out. He just got convicted. That was the year he got convicted of his arson in the death, and then he was locked up. He was bored. Every single time he got out, he had fun. He got paid trips, basically, by the police department. He got fed. He got toured around Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yep.
He made it up every single time. That's why he confessed to everything he did. And you could see him getting pissed when he gets no attention. It's just so obvious when you look at it from that angle that he's using them. And he even called them stupid.
Right.
He said he was fucking with them. He literally said that.
Right. And let me also say, the police originally claimed that Otis Toole showed them the site where Adam's severed head was found, but Otis never showed them the site. What they did was, once they got to it, they pulled off into the swell area of the Turnpike off the side and slowed down to 20 miles an hour. And after they originally showed Otis the bridge, a photo of it, when they first interviewed him, trying to so he could recollect his memory. Now all of a sudden he says, "Yeah, that's it. I think this is it." After they pull off the side and park right in front of it.
Right.
And then later they say he showed them, he led them to the spot. He didn't lead them to the spot. And then same thing where the rest of Adam's body was found. They took him to that site, and he was pointing out good locations for them to dig. And they kept digging holes all over the place, but they never could find anything. And then when they write their reports, they forget to mention all the holes he made them dig.
Wow. It just makes you wonder if a jury saw that, what they would think.
Well, a jury would find Otis Toole guilty. And the reason I know that is because this detective, Joe Matthews, has done shows, radio shows, and they shower him with accolades for being such a great detective and solving this all by himself. And then I would call these radio shows. One of them I did, and they let me come on after Matthews, And so I put those on my website. You can listen to Matthews' radio show and mine with Mia Taylor. We were both on the same radio show that Matthews was on. In fact, I told him, call Matthews and invite him on with us. And they did, but he refused to come on with us. He doesn't want to face Mia Taylor.
Man. Yeah, I was watching a A&E documentary, actually, before we went on the air tonight. And it was Matthews who said, when they got to the Walsh case about it, because the whole thing was about Otis Toole, his quote was, "There was no good witnesses."
Oh, yes, this is what they say.
Because he never called any.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, Lisa. Yes.
I talked to all of them. Nobody talked to any of them, including the ones before him. Just saying.
Yeah.
Well, I
just
mean,
it's
every
shocking
good
to me.
prosecutor knows you don't call a witness if you don't like what they're going to say.
Right.
Exactly.
But
And now,
but that's
one
the thing
one
is,
thing that we didn't get into with that I was also curious about, FBI agent Neil Pertel. Is that how you
Correct.
say his name?
Yes, it is.
He seemed to be pretty focused on trying to get at the real truth of what was going on here.
Right.
Whatever happened to it after he gave the info to the Miami field office?
Well, keep in mind, the day that Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested, the FBI made the connection right away. And Neil Patel was the one that called the Hollywood Police Department and said, hey, you got to look at this. We think this is related. This guy was living in your area. You know, and he's murdered before he came to your area.
Mm-hmm.
And so they told them to look into it, but they never have. You know, this detective, it took him a year and a half of John Walsh as well as the FBI prodding this detective, the original lead detective on the case. His name was Jack Hoffman, to finally go up to Milwaukee, was Portage, Wisconsin, actually, where John Dahmer was, to interview him. And so he kept making excuses not to go because he did not want to go up to Wisconsin. So finally, John Walsh got a hold of the state attorney's office, and he asked them if they would write a letter saying that Florida would not seek capital punishment. And he got that letter, and he gave it to the detective, Jack Hoffman. He says, here's a letter. Go up and interview him. And John and the detective said, well, we don't have any money to go up there. So John Walsh said, well, I'm making pretty good money on TV these days. I'll pay for your trip. So after his back was to the wall and he ran out of excuses, he finally went up there. He interviewed Dahmer, and he never even offered that letter of concession on the death penalty to Dahmer.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a false interview. He was all softball questions, and he was never trying to, really pin this on Dahmer because it would only make their police department, and especially him, look really bad. And like I said, Milwaukee's doing the same thing with Dean Vaughn, who was murdered in the same building as Dahmer. And the police in Milwaukee knew it had to be somebody within the 49 units of the Oxford building because there was a locked door. You needed a key to get in. And if you were a visitor, you had to use the intercom system and be buzzed in. So they were convinced it had to be somebody. They interviewed everybody, and Dahmer claimed he didn't know anything about Dean Vaughn, didn't know him. And then witnesses say that, no, that's not true, that they saw him going into Dahmer's apartment. They saw Dahmer going into his apartment. So Dahmer lied so many times, and they just buy all his lies. And they
Well,
talk,
say
and
this
this is
is
what
the
they say.
this is the problem with the type of questions. If you go door to door and say, "Did you know this guy?" then and everybody says no, then you're like, "Well, okay." But if you go door to door and say, "Who do you know who hung out with this guy?" That's you're going to get a whole different set of answers.
Right.
So asking the
And
right questions, well, in like any scenario, but especially in police work, Jesus, it's not hard to figure out. Ask better questions, you'll get better answers.
yeah, and this was an open homicide investigation going on at the time for 4 months. This was 4 months before Dahmer was finally captured.
Wow.
And then they went into full cover-up mode. Just like I said, like the Hollywood Police Department. There's an old saying, when you mess up, never fess up. That's what they do.
Right.
Yeah, they'll do anything. Because keep in mind, they want their pensions.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing I was reading before we went on, because I just was trying to grasp how they can't see that it's the difference between MO and signature here. That's what's important. I was reading a chapter of the crime classification manual written by the profiler John Douglas, and he was talking all about that. He says signature almost always tells you more and better info than victimology or MO, because signature it doesn't change as often.
Well, how about this for an MO, right? Otis Toole has never been known to harm anybody. In fact, the only person that he's known to have murdered may have been an arson accident because he burnt the building down, and somebody couldn't escape because the building went up to the second floor and the stairwell was on fire, and he ended up dying several weeks after from third-degree burns over his entire body. But anyway, that's the only victim that's really been proven of Otis Toole. Okay, Adam Walsh had his head severed. Now, if that doesn't fit Jeffrey Dahmer's M.O., I don't know what does. And they keep talking about this doesn't fit Dahmer's M.O. Because of Adam's age.
Plus
Number
one,
the boy. He approached me first.
Well, he killed other children.
Yes, exactly. He was a convicted pedophile at the time of his arrest.
Yep.
And
he was an admitted opportunist too.
Right. Once he was arrested,
to being an opportunist.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying once Dahmer was arrested, his parole was they suspended his parole due to numerous violations. Obviously, from the murders in the apartment, those are definitely parole violations.
Is it really? Huh? That's weird.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny when the parole officer said that. You know, she said she immediately, suspended his parole.
Well, another thing that's
in prison now.
about Dahmer is that he, there was almost 2 weeks between when Adam was taken and when his remains were discovered, which is also consistent with Dahmer. He liked to keep him around a while.
Yeah, Dahmer.
Yeah, the cooling off, you mean?
No, I mean he kept him alive for a while.
Alive.
Right. Oh, okay. And yeah, he would again have to have a place to put him, getting back to the meter.
He lived at the Bimini Hotel. Bimini Hotel, which he paid a month and a half of rent for. So he had it for that time, and then he actually was getting kicked out right around the time Adam's head was discovered, which is the logic in why he got rid of it.
Yeah.
That part I didn't see. Interesting.
Yeah. What happened was Jeffrey Dahmer was a disheveled mess. So Ken Halbert thought he would get him a room, he would be better off. So he actually paid for the hotel room the first initial month, and Jeffrey Dahmer he would take it out of Jeffrey Dahmer's pay.
Okay.
And Jeffrey Dahmer didn't keep up with the rent, so they kicked him out after about a month, which was about the time that Adam was abducted.
Wow.
So all of a sudden he had no place to stay again. So now he was either in the street or in the meter room.
I have a question about the Turnpike Witnesses. Did they see this happen during the day, or was this at night?
Go ahead, Lisa. That's for you.
Pardon?
Both.
How could
because there's two witnesses that saw on August 4th and two witnesses that saw on August 7th. So, and the two witnesses that saw it on August 4th saw it during the day. So one is Richard King, who we didn't give a talk to. It was in the afternoon when he saw it. And then the one I talked to, his name is Tom Hayslip, and he was driving on the Turnpike that day because he was taking his son with him. They were going up early in the morning to a nursery to get some trees. He's familiar with the Turnpike, but not the area. It was early in the morning. His son had fallen asleep. He went to reach over for his map in between the seats, and that's when he looks up and he sees the back of a blue van, and he's like, whoa. He realizes he's actually over into the shoulder. So he swerves and gets back on the road, but that blue van stuck out to him because he almost hit it. And so back in that time in 1981, the next thought was, oh my gosh, is this guy okay? But he realized the blue van was moving, but just very slowly. And so it was rolling along the side, and it was between the exits where that mile marker area is, 130, 131, which is where Adam's head was found off of 130. And so he called after Adam's head was found because all of a sudden they did a report and they were looking for And they did something on the news that had to do with the blue van was involved. And so he's like, oh, yeah, I remember that. And then when he called, they were overwhelmed with calls. The call center was being manned by volunteers. John Walsh himself was taking phone calls. So when you look at these notes, Richard King's a perfect example. It says on there he can give a description of a man. Why didn't they take it? Everybody else was white male. They didn't write white male. They didn't write black. They didn't write Hispanic. They didn't write female. They didn't write chicken. Nothing. Just said he could describe it and left it at that. Nobody followed up with him.
I don't think we got into the tie-in of the blue van at the Hollywood Mall on the 27th either. With that, I was thinking specifically of Bill Bowen's testimony.
Right.
I talked to him as well, and so is Willis. Yeah.
But he was walking in. I'm not sure why, but he said that he saw a fight, I guess, or a scuffle at a blue van in the parking lot between a man and a boy, where a man was holding the boy in the air by the arm. And the boy was saying, I don't want to go. And the guy said, you're going to go. And then threw him into the van.
Yeah, he says like a sack of potatoes, because in his mind, he thought it was either his stepdad or his brother. But Bill was actually going because he had to change his address. Because, again, 1981, you can't do that online. You had to walk into a store.
Right.
He was moving to Alabama. And so he was going in to change or pay his bill or change the name on his bill, one of those two. And, he saw it. And then he saw him throw him into a blue van and speed off. And he called as well and gave a description. And then there's several other people. And Willis didn't see the van, but I'll let him tell that part. But
right, and Bill's just one witness that saw a van. You also, Janice Santomacino saw a blue van. Mia Taylor saw the blue van the day before Adam when Jeffrey Dahmer was there and tried to abduct her brother. Philip Law is another one that saw a blue van. Philip was going to pay his bill because the building area was right near the toy department. So he was going in that west door also. And when he walked into the Sears, he saw this guy manhandling this little boy outside the mall. And Phil says that the reason he remembers the blue van is because he had his eye on a parking space, but because the blue van was parked in the fire lane, it was blocking traffic. It was like half into one of the lanes. And there was a bus behind it that couldn't move around it because they had to wait for the traffic to pass. And because of that, somebody else took that space he had in mind, and he lost his parking space. And then when he walked in the store, into the Sears, he had to walk around the blue van that was the cause of him losing his space. So he remembers the blue van. And then as he walked in, he saw this guy manhandling this kid, and this kid was screaming, "You're not my daddy, I don't want to go." And the man said, "I'm taking you to your daddy." And Bill was thinking, boy, his son was about the same age as this little boy, and he wouldn't manhandle his kid like that.
Right.
And he started walking backwards as he's watching this, thinking, maybe he should intervene or something. But then he started thinking that, that may be a stepfather, because, kids don't respect stepfathers the way they do their natural father. So, that a lot of times they'll say things like, you're not my daddy to a stepfather.
Right.
And so that's what he was thinking. But then he went to the service desk to pay his bill, and he started having second thoughts. He ran back outside. The guy, the little boy, and the van, the blue van, were all gone. And he said he remembers that he was trying to remember the description. And he felt like he couldn't remember everything, so he concentrated on the little boy in case he heard anything about a boy ending up missing. And sure enough, his description is exactly Adam Walsh's description with the captain's hat and the freckles and the gap teeth and all that. And he didn't go to the police right away because he felt so bad about not intervening. And years later, when he did go, they completely dismissed him. Before they even gave him the interview, they dismissed him. And it was during the interview, after they told him they appreciate him coming in, but what he witnessed has nothing to do with the Adam Walsh case. But Bill kept insisting. What he did was he went to one of the detectives who dismissed him, Mark Smith. So he went over Mark Smith's head to the captain. I think his name was Dunbar, and he also dismissed him. So he worked his way over to the state attorney's office, and it was the state attorney's office that actually did the interview. And it was the state attorney, Phil Mundy, who actually dismissed him before he even gave him the interview. He even wrote a letter attached to the interview saying that Phil was very sarcastic and we're only giving him this interview at his own insistence. Okay?
Wow.
And then during the interview, he mentions a blue van, and he goes, "Oh, there was a blue van?" After they already dismissed him. Then he describes Adam to a T. And they go, "Oh, he had a captain's hat on? Oh, he had flip-flops?" It's so obvious. And then they still dismiss him.
Now, what was that I read about the police saying that they had a family that claimed they had the blue van? But then when they were trying to go back and verify that, they couldn't find anything like that in their record.
Boy, that was just a complete false lie.
Yeah.
It's when ABC tried to contact him, when they found that meter room, they did that show. They contacted them, and that was Detective Smith, and they asked Smith about the blue van. He says, "Oh, no. We found that blue van. It was a family that was having an altercation in the parking lot, So then they called the lead detective, the original lead detective, Jack Hoffman. He didn't know anything about a family with a blue van,
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But then all of a sudden he stopped talking to them and he hung up. So that's just a false story that he made up when they were already in cover-up mode.
Well, and which gets into the next interesting part of this. 2008 rolls around, and they come out and they basically say publicly that they are satisfied with Toole as the killer, but they lost a bunch of the evidence.
Right, like I said, lost is another word for expunged.
Wow. Because that was originally 10,000 pages, wasn't it?
Yeah. So what happened to some of those
What was it, a
pages?
flood or a fire?
Yeah. But listen, what happened was this detective that we talked about that did the polygraph test and exonerated James Campbell, John Walsh's house guest, as well as the Walshes, okay? Years later, he found out that John Walsh was chosen to be the host of America's Most Wanted, which aired, I think it was February 8th or 16th on 1987. The first show started airing. And so he called John Walsh up and befriended him. And John Walsh apparently remembered that he was the one that did the polygraphs and exonerated them. So he hired this detective as the senior lead investigator on America's Most Wanted. So now John had one of these lying, bumbling, stumbling detectives right in his midst for years, feeding him false information about his own son's abduction.
Wow.
And this is the detective that eventually John Walsh asked to reinvestigate the case, and he came up with this 400-page manuscript titled, he named it after himself, The Matthews Report, and bamboozled the Hollywood Police Department into closing the case.
And you know what's interesting?
What's that, Lisa?
You know what else is interesting? The whole running of America's Most Wanted, all those decades.
Yeah.
How many times did Adam's case run?
Ever?
Yeah, right, exactly. You know why?
How many times? Once?
Once. The finale.
Wow.
Only after they canceled the show. John Walsh finally did it because the Hollywood Police Department kept asking them not to do it because they would interfere with the case.
They were an
investigation. Yeah.
Wow.
And Lisa also interviewed that detective Matthews. So Lisa, tell these guys and his listeners what Matthews said about the blue van at the Turnpike.
It was as inconsequential as the Loch Ness Monster.
My.
To him. That's in his book also on page 26 of his book. He says,
yeah.
Of all the blue van sightings.
Everything.
Yeah, and also he said, remember Lisa, of the blue van sighting at the Turnpike. He says, "Oh, there are over 7,000 blue vans in Florida. That's meaningless."
You know how many blue vans there are, white vans? If we went after every blue van, everything was just no way.
Yeah,
Wow.
even when you have witnesses, you know, the timing, so relevant. Because I even talked to the medical examiner, you know, and he told me, his name is Ronald Wright, Dr. Wright, he told me that timing would have been perfect. Because back then, they even put a pig's head in the water to determine the amount of decay, you know, and try to figure out how long the severed head was in the water, you know. And they came up with anything from like days to up to 2 weeks. And when I told him the 3-day timeline, he says, "Wow, that would have been perfect, that timing," you know. And even with that, Matthews thinks a blue van being sighted 3 days before the severed head was found is totally meaningless. And a guy standing on the footbridge, right, throwing something round. What is something round? Taking it out of a white bucket and tossing it into the water. What could that possibly be?
Volleyball.
Right?
Watermelon.
At 12:30 in the morning. This is 12:30 in the morning, which would have really actually not been Friday. It would have been Saturday, which means it's less than 3 days. You're talking about 2.5 days.
So just to be clear, I mean, you don't really fault John Walsh with much of anything. I mean, he kind of he ended up doing a lot of good with his show, right?
Right, exactly. And he's a victim, and he always will be a victim of a murdered child.
Right. And as you say, bamboozled by the police.
Well, not by the police, one detective. Listen,
I talked.
Say again, Lisa.
Sorry, I was going to say. Also, and I don't mean any offense by any of it, but I think also he has a reputation as a crime buster, America's Most Wanted, his face. Do you think it would look okay or be okay to come out and say, "Look, I just got duped by this guy I was friends with for decades and trusted"?
Actually, I think that would do a lot of good.
I think so, but I think sometimes the mentality people have, they don't agree with that, you know, and I think that might be why he doesn't, because I think he might feel like maybe it's, or maybe he just doesn't believe it. I don't know.
Getting over that in his own head, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what it's got to be like. You know, maybe they avoid listening to anything that has to do with it because to them it's over and done with, and that's good enough, you know, but I don't know.
They just so desperately want closure.
Right, exactly. That's what it is. Let me tell you also, you know, when the police chief closed this case, you can go listen to his interview. It's on my website, okay? And he said during the interview that police, past and present, all believed it was Otis Toole. But according to their statements in their own case files, none of them believe that. In fact, I talked to one of them, Ron Hickman, and he was the second lead detective. And when I called him in North Florida, at first he had no clue who I was. And he told me I was the investigator on the case from its inception, and I never heard of you. And then he finally says, "Oh, are you the guy that sued the Hollywood Police Department?" I said, "Yes." And then he remembered who I was because I did file a lawsuit against them. And when I told him, I said, "Listen, you know, when they closed the case, the police chief, Chad Wagner, said detectives past and present all believed it was Otis Toole." He said, "Well, they know I don't."
Really?
None of these detectives believe it was Otis Toole. Only one of them, Detective Joe Matthews.
So, but they didn't necessarily think it was Dahmer. They just didn't think it was Toole. Is that correct statement?
No, depending on the time frame. After Dahmer was caught, the lead detective, I believe he did know it was Dahmer because the composite, his jaw dropped when I went to him in '91 after Dahmer was captured with that composite.
Okay.
And I always believed that I may have been the one that caused them to lose all that evidence. I believe that's when they went into full cover-up mode. Because if you would have seen the look on this guy's face, he made all his dots lined up. Then he realized that, oh my God, it was me who dismissed all these cases. There was one in South Beach. There was one in Deerfield Beach, Plantation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the one Riviera Beach, the Twin City Mall, and he was dismissing everything.
Yeah, and that's another thing that had been kind of on my mind throughout this is we've been talking. Do you think it was incompetence, or do you think it was, I don't know if I want to say malevolence or
Blindness
bad
is what
designs?
it was blindness. What happened was, you know, when there's a murder, they always deal in on the family first. They have to be exonerated before
Sure.
they can move on with the investigation. So naturally, the Walshes were, but they never could exonerate James Campbell because James Campbell, like I said, was John Walsh's friend. He was actually John Walsh's house guest. He was living in John Walsh's house at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, while John Walsh was out to work, he was having an affair with John's wife, Reve. And he even proposed marriage to her, but she told him she couldn't marry him because she had a son with John. So their thinking was, get rid of the kid, you get the wife. And on top of that, John had asked James to move out of the house, pack up, and get out 2 weeks before Adam was abducted. So that was their thinking at the time. They were so blind on that they just wanted him as their suspect, and they were dismissing everything else. The problem is, after about 4 months of grilling him, literally, I mean, the lead detective, Jack Hoffman, could be heard all the way down the hallway screaming in the interrogation room at James Campbell, calling him all kinds of names, like, you know, a family dildo, a pet, or your family pet, you know. And while they were doing this, they were dismissing everything.
Right.
So, and he was. So, and other witnesses that also at the Hollywood Mall that described the blue van, and made composites like the Pottenbergs. What happened was Tim Pottenberg, he was there with his mother and his grandmother. And they went to the food court, and they ate lunch, and then they had parked a car over by the north entrance to the mall, which was by the Sears, okay? And on the way, after they finished lunch, Marilyn, his mom, wanted to, her legs were bothering her, so she didn't feel like walking around all the way to the other end of the mall to get their vehicle. So Tim and his grandmother, Carolyn, they went to retrieve the car and drive it around to the food court side to pick up their mother. But on the way there, they passed by the toy department. And Tim stopped in the toy department. He saw this disheveled man there with something in his hand, like a toy or something, he said. And he kept just looking around. He wasn't really looking at the toy. He just kept looking around at the kids. And so Tim said they finally left, and they saw this guy run out of the north exit, and he ran and got into a blue van and come driving around. Just as they were stepping off the curb, he almost ran into them and ran them over as he drove wildly around the corner to the west side, parked in the fire lane, and ran back in. And he came out with this kid and tossing him into the blue van. So he was the first one to make a composite. And he was 10 years old at the time. And that composite is the spinning image of Jeffrey Dahmer. And when I went up to Central Florida to interview him, and I showed him the composite of Tool, and he completely dismissed Artist Tool. And he says, I've always told my grandmother that's not the guy, you know, when they closed the case.
Wow.
They got the wrong guy. And then I showed him Jeffrey Dahmer, and he said, yep, that's the guy. When he made that composite, that's who he was describing. That's the guy. You know, he was 100% positive that was the guy. You know, and same thing with the other witnesses. They all say it was Jeffrey Dahmer, that was the person they were trying to describe.
All right, so we're about out of time, but I have one last question for you, and that is, what would you ideally, in your ideal scenario, what would you like to see happen out of all of this information that you've put together?
Okay. Well, what bothers me about this case is the police, they go after the weak, the downtrodden, the homeless, the uneducated people, have no education, no family to come to their aid, no money to defend themselves, and they pin murders on them. I want Artist Toole to be found uninvolved in this case, irrelevant, and that's why I sued them. And also, I would like to see Jeffrey Dahmer named as the suspect, and that's why I do what I do. Like I said, Mia Taylor's mom, because Mia Taylor was there when Adam was abducted, she saw this guy leaning over Adam, whispering to him, on the day he was abducted, and taken by the hand and walking out with him. And her mom, when her brother Joel said that he wanted to stay and play with his friend, her mom said, no, his brother's here now. I mean, his father's here now. So she thought that was his father. Okay, Philip Law thought it was a stepdad. Bill Bowen out in the parking lot thought it was an older brother.
Right.
So that's what made them have second thoughts, and hesitate and not do anything. But had I walked further down into the toy department, I would have known better. I would have known that was not an older brother or stepdad or his father. I would have done something, and that's what's always bothered me, and that's why I do what I do.
And to be clear, I don't think we mentioned it. Artist Toole died in prison, 1996, of cirrhosis of the liver.
Right, which is complications of AIDS.
So.
Right. So it's not going to change anything for Toole or Dahmer.
Yeah. Well, listen, I don't know how much time
but the
we have
record,
left. Right. But listen, when Artist Toole died, they say there was this deathbed confession, right?
Mm.
There was never a deathbed confession, okay? What Joe Matthews does, he uses witnesses that passed away, okay? And he claims that he interviewed them before they passed away, and this is what they said. They all claim that Artist Toole gave this deathbed confession. But what this detective fails to realize, these witnesses also gave statements under oath. He thought nobody would check what he says,
Right.
And I read the interview that Barry Grimilli, who was in charge of the infirmary where Artist Toole passed away at Lake Butler, gave an interview under oath to the state attorney's office, and this is one of the things he said, okay? Because, of course, Joe Matthews said Barry said that Artist Toole gave him a full confession. So now, under oath, in his interview with the state attorney's office, Barry Grimilli said this, okay, I heard John Walsh come on his show once and say something about there was this deathbed confession. That's just not so. I'm paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
Artist Toole never opened up to anybody. He never talked about anything. So who are you going to believe? Barry Grimilli under oath or Joe Matthews? Okay? Another one is Mia Taylor's brother, Joel, who passed away. He said that he interviewed Joe. And Joe claims that he was one of the boys that was kicked out of the store with Adam, the other white boy. But that's just not so, according to Mia. And he claims that Mia, in his book, claims that was Artist Toole. This story is so twisted because another part of this story is that this happened out in the parking lot. It never was inside the mall. When all these witnesses saw Adam inside the mall being abducted, And so Mia refutes that story of Joe Matthews. Another one is Vernon Jones. He was a black kid that actually was playing a baseball Atari game with Adam. And he says that there was this guy. How much time do we have left? Enough time?
Yeah, let's make this the last one.
Okay. He said there was this guy standing a few feet away, hissing at him, going, psst, psst, hey, you. And he looked at this guy, thinking to himself, man, I'm not going with you. And just then he heard a big crack. He turns around, and Adam is standing there with this big grin on his face because Adam, being 6, just got a Grand Slam home run and beat Vern, who was 9 years old at the time. So Vern got so upset, he went around the other side of the aisle and started playing Donkey Kong by himself. And a couple minutes later, he saw this guy walking out with Adam But at that age, he didn't know any better.
Right.
I think he was 9, or he might have been a little bit older. I don't remember the exact age. But anyways, the next night when they were home, or that very same night, he was visiting his grandparents in Hallandale area, where I live, and the grandmother called Vern. He was in the bedroom and said, "Vern, get out here." They had the news on, and he says, "You were in the mall today. Did you see this kid?" And he goes, "Grandpa," because his grandpa was there too. He says, "That's the boy I was playing the video game with."
Wow.
So the grandfather takes it to the Hollywood Police Department. They never make it inside because this big, heavy-set police officer standing by the entrance. His grandfather went over to him to inquire about the case, and this police officer turned to him, spat a wad of tobacco out on his grandfather's shoe, and said, "Boy, I ain't got time for you." So his grandfather took Vern, turned around, and left and went home. Vern says at 9 years old, that's the first time he's ever heard about racism. But, he couldn't understand why this big, heavy-set white police officer was calling his grandfather boy when his grandfather was so much older than him. And so they left, and nobody would hear from Vern until he grew up and wrote John Walsh a letter apologizing, saying that he was in the mall playing with Adam and all this. And they sent that letter to the Hollywood Police Department. They asked him to call him. To this day, they've never called him.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the kind of investigation they're doing. Like Lisa said, they don't call anybody.
So, any final statement, Lisa? Anything you want to add at the end here?
No, I think Willis did a great job with his, research himself and then putting all the case files online because, that's something that's a no-brainer right there. You could see it for yourself, obviously it's a lot to wade through, but I would just say that I don't think it was done right and it just needs to be redone.
Well, I got to say, there's any famous case, there's always somebody who's got some weird ass conspiracy theory about it with very, very, you got to take some huge leaps with these guys, right? You always they're making these very, spider thin connections between things and making huge leaps of logic to make their weird theories connect up. But this is not that.
Mm-hmm.
You've got
Right.
mountains of
agree
documentation
Right.
and tons
And
of
listen,
witnesses.
Right. And I've done radio shows with these other witnesses, and you can go to frustratedwitness.com and listen to some of the other interviews that I've done on other shows with these witnesses. And you can
Like
actually
their
hear them.
Facebook page too, people.
Yes,
Frustrated Witness on Facebook.
Correct. Right. Lots of information there as well.
All right.
And hopefully, if you don't mind, I'd like to put a link to your podcast as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no problem at all. We are linked to you guys on our page too, facebook.com Real Monsters Podcast. You
Okay,
are,
great.
Frustrated Witness is in the page favorites, so people can go there too.
Right, and I'll do that myself.
Thank you, Willis.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Willis. Thank
Been a
you,
pleasure.
Lisa,
Thank
for
you.
being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
pleasure, guys.
Good night,
Have
everybody.
a great night.
All right. Good night.